The Panama Canal is considered to be one of the greatest engineering marvels of the 20th century. When it opened in 1914, it was the most ambitious undertaking in human history, with 27,000 deaths that occurred to workers on the canal construction. It was a great task that took over half a century to complete. They had to move mountains, create lakes, and fight diseases such as malaria and yellow fever. Not only did the canal break the physical barrier between the two oceans, it also broke the trade barrier between the East and the West. For nearly 400 years, explorers and engineers from Spain, Italy, Scotland, France, and other countries have dreamed of a shortcut across Central America, ever since the Spanish explorer crossed the isthmus in 1513. Ships would no longer need to go around Cape Horn at the southernmost tip of South America. In 1850, the United States became more interested in building a canal because of the gold rush in California. Traveling through the country was dangerous, and it would take a long time to travel around South America. They planned to build a way of transportation that would provide a quicker route to California. America decided that a northern state in Colombia, called Panama, would be a good fit for a canal. But after some time, they decided that the topography was too rugged. So instead of building a canal, they built the Panama Railroad. Later, in 1881, the French attempted to build a sea-level canal through Panama. This attempt was led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, who successfully led the construction of the Suez Canal and assured everyone that a canal in Panama would be easier to make than the Suez. But he didn't anticipate the large mountain ranges in Panama. Another problem with a sea-level canal was that the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans on either side of the Panama Isthmus are at different water levels due to the water currents and tidal effects. This would have created strong and varying currents in a sea-level canal. In spite of all this, Lesseps was determined to get the job done. Work began in 1882. Lesseps had chosen to follow the route of the Panama Railroad because he thought it was the safest and easiest route. But Lesseps didn't anticipate the obstacles of working in the wet tropics. Most of the arriving workers did not realize that the jungles were dangerous, filled with deadly bugs and animals. Rain often flooded the rivers, which resulted in giant mudslides. Malaria and yellow fever began spreading in the camps. At that time, no one knew how these diseases spread. As more and more things went wrong, people started questioning Lesseps' leadership and his ability to handle such a big task. After almost 10 years, Lesseps' Panama Canal enterprise went bankrupt in 1889. Over 20,000 men died of malaria and yellow fever, along with other natural causes. Despite past failures, America was still interested in building a canal through Central America. And when Theodore Roosevelt became president in 1901, building a canal became his top priority. Congress was still debating whether the canal should cut across Panama or Nicaragua. More people were leaning towards Nicaragua, but the American Congress changed their mind when they were shown a map of Nicaragua with an active volcano on it. Congress was convinced and decided to carry on with the canal in Panama. In 1902, the United States bought the rights to the French canal property and equipment for a sum of $40 million. Next, they presented a plan to complete the project to Colombia, but the Colombian Congress decided that the financial terms were unacceptable and turned down the American offer. President Roosevelt sent U.S. warships to support the Panamanian Revolution, and Panama declared independence from Colombia in 1903. Panama, the newly independent country, sold the U.S. a 10-mile-wide strip of land to build a canal for $10 million. The Americans' first year in Panama was almost as horrid as the French attempt. Chief Engineer John Findlay Wallace neglected to organize the effort or to develop an action plan. The food was putrid, the living conditions abysmal. Disease struck and 3 out of 4 Americans booked passage home. Engineer Wallace soon followed. The next chief engineer was John Stevens. He proved his ability in his lead on the Great Northern Railroad. Dr. William Gorgas, who had helped to eradicate yellow fever in Havana years before by killing the mosquitoes that carried it, directed sanitation efforts. Workers drained swamps, swept drainage ditches, paved roads, and installed plumbing. They sprayed pesticides by the ton. Entire towns rose from the jungle, complete with housing, schools, churches, commissionaries, and social halls. The idea was to dam the Chagres River to create a 40-mile-long Gatun Lake at the highest point of the canal. Water from this large reservoir would then be gravity-fed down the locks in order to lift the ships up 85 feet from sea level to lake level. The ships would then cross the lake and enter the locks on the other side that would lower them down to the ocean at the opposite end of the canal. Damming the river also had the advantage. It tamed the wild Chagres River. The canal project was separated into 3 divisions: the Atlantic, Central, and Pacific. The Atlantic Division was responsible for dredging the Atlantic side of the canal and for building the locks that would carry the ships up from the Atlantic Ocean to Gatun Lake. The Pacific Division would do the same thing on the Pacific side. The Central Division had the most difficult task. Its job was to dam the wild Chagres River in order to create one of the largest artificial lakes in the world. The Central Division had to dig an 8-mile-long trench at an average depth of 120 feet through the Continental Divide at the Pacific end of Gatun Lake. This trench was called Culebra Cut. The Culebra Cut represented the canal builder's biggest challenge. It required the digging of a channel through Panama's highland region, the Continental Divide. A channel that had to be dug from hard rock and shale rather than from soft earth. The unstable nature of the soil and rock in the area of Culebra Cut made it one of the most difficult and challenging sections of the entire canal project. Workers labored in temperatures of 100 or more degrees Fahrenheit and used rock drills, dynamite, and steam shovels to remove as many as 96 million cubic yards of dirt and rock as they lowered the ground to within 40 feet of sea level. Hillsides were subject to unpredictable mudslides. They lose months or even years due to these mudslides. For example, the cucaracha or cockroach slide continued for years and poured millions of cubic yards into the canal excavation. Although the hillsides have now been cut back and their angles decreased to lessen the threat of serious slides, dredging remains a necessary part of canal maintenance in order to ensure an open channel. The Panama Canal officially opened on August 15, 1914, although the planned grand ceremony was downgraded due to the outbreak of World War I. Ultimately, it created a symbol of American economic and industrial power. The United States had 3 advantages that the French didn't, 3 important things that enabled them to complete the Panama Canal. First, they had the scientific discovery by Ronald Ross that mosquitoes carried malaria and yellow fever. This knowledge enabled them to control the mosquito population and therefore control the spread of these diseases. Secondly, they decided to go with a lock system instead of a sea-level trench. They figured out how to feed the locks from Gatun Lake, which is at the high point of the canal. America also had more money than France, enough financial resources to build the infrastructure required to support the large number of workers. They had hospitals to treat the sick and injured, towns for workers to live in, train tracks to carry dirt, everything needed to get the job done. The construction of the Panama Canal has had a huge impact on the world. The Panama Canal shortened the trip between the Americas and Eurasia by more than 10,000 miles. Because of this, trade by sea greatly improved. Both the East and the West were united. So did the sizes of ships to carry large amounts of cargo as well as people. The Panama Canal also positively impacted the United States. The canal made the United States one of the most powerful nations on Earth by allowing them to control a part of the sea. Today, anywhere from 13,000 to 14,000 ships cross the canal every year. In 2010, the 1 millionth vessel crossed the canal since it first opened in 1914.